Welcome to the latest episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. My name is Greg Story. I'm the president of Dale Carnegie Training, Tokyo, Japan. And my special guest today is Philippe Auvaro, who is the previous president of OrphanPacific, which is part of the CMIC group. Welcome, Philippe. We've known each other for quite a long time. I think we met through JMIC, actually, many years ago. Was it the, what embassy was that? We gave a speech there together.
Belgium embassy.
Belgium, was it? Yeah.
Yes.
Beautiful venue. I remember that.
Exactly.
Anyway, so we are going to talk about leadership in Japan. So let's sort of begin with, how did you come to be working in Japan? What has your career trajectory been? And what sort of things you've been doing here? So why is it you're in Japan?
Yes, first of all, let me thank you again for your invitation today. It's a pleasure, and I must say also it's an honor because I see my name in the long list of quite a lot of famous people who came to join your webcast. So thanks again for the invitation. Japan. Why Japan? Japan is in fact, when I try to reflect and put some logic on my career development, if I may do so, is a driving guide of what I'm doing right now. I mean, I've chosen to work in the pharmaceutical industry because I wanted to work in Japan.
Oh, you chose the industry because you had the country destination in mind. That's interesting.
To choose the industry is a bit preposterous. Let's say that back in the 80s, I'm born in 64, so maybe you'll see a pre-mark of the Tokyo Olympic year, and I'm born in France. But the reason why I insist on my birth date is that I belong to that generation of reading for girl when you're in college, and Japan as number one, and Japan a new economic model, and that was before the stagflation and all this lethargy into which the Japan economy entered in the 90s. So if I was to be born 10 years later, we may have had this interview in China, maybe. Yeah, I don't know.
Right.
Okay, so I'm a little bit the child of my generation. So truly inspired by people who were looking at Japan as extraterrestrial, an economic model that nobody had seen coming. Of course, you know, some negativity to it. The copying Japan, the very light on copyright and intellectual property Japan, the not so innovative Japan, and so on. But also at the back of it, the quality obsessed Japan, the very socially driven Japan, and so on. And so Japan, for all this period of me entering into university, those years, was like, you know, a blinking dot on the radar screen. And I graduated from a business school in France. That was already a tough period for, you know, looking for a job. I was very attracted to the Japanese culture. I actually had, you know, a very strong acquaintance with Japanese movie. The classic ones, and even beyond that, Mizoguchi, Ozu, and so through the culture and by this halo of you know, Japan, like an absolutely unexpected phenomenon of economic growth, jumping for literally zero ground post-war to the economy that we witnessed in the 80s. Sony buying Universal. I mean, you remember also the Congress doing some Japan bashing and crushing a radio cassette in front of the Congress building. So Japan was part of that decoration, and I'm a French national, as I said. And back in those days, military service was compulsory, and but there was a very smart. I think the system still exists, even though military service is not mandatory anymore. That you could perform your duty as an intern for a French company based overseas, and it's called a cooperation. So the essence of this framework was to bring young engineers or young graduates to country in the phase of economic development and bring whatever, the French education could bring to those countries. So I was literally bending the rules of this cooperation because Japan was nowhere on the map of developing countries, actually quite mature in many areas. But the system existed also here. And literally, you had two sectors where the French industry was actively, involved in Japan: the bank and the pharma. Mm. I didn't get the job in the bank, so I got the job in the pharma industry. And then, you can call me naive, or I didn't have much experience for obvious reason, and I didn't know back then that once in pharma, always in pharma. That is to say, there was this very strong attraction of working for a truly global industry. I mean, medicine are needed everywhere in the world, maybe at different level, maybe to treat different diseases. But at the end of the day, pharma as kind of call of duty for being universally present. I had a strong attraction to working overseas, to be exposed to different culture, starting with the Japanese culture, as I mentioned before. And so I was at the crossing of, making my first acquaintance with the pharmaceutical industry and achieving my dream or goal of being an active social person in Japan. Met my wife here, started a family here, went through some earthquake traumatic experience in Kobe, then, returned to Japan, to Tokyo, and the only episode that took me away from the archipelago was my posting in Taiwan and in Korea between 1997 and 2005, so 8 years. Yes, so during this 8-year period of being posted in Taiwan and in Korea, then I returned to Japan in 2005, and since then, so for the last 16 years, being very active again and again in the pharma industry, but more particularly in the Japanese environment of that industry.
Mm. So when you first came to Japan as an intern, which was a pharma company? Which one were you working for?
That was a French company called Roussel.
Mm-hmm. Actually, and they hired you? You came as
So here is the story. Roussel had a long experience of recruiting those co-parents, so the member of this cooperation, military service program. That didn't mean that we would obviously join the company after the internship. So really based on the internship concept, they pick you, they train you, they make you work hard, and then at the end of the day, they see if you're fit or not in the. And essentially, when I finished this cooperation program, actually that was the start of the first Middle East crisis in Iraq. So back in recently, demised Colin Powell, actually, this George Bush Senior, first war against the Iraqis. And so there was a complete freeze on recruiting. And so I was actually not sure I would continue in pharma when I returned to France. And actually, my Japanese wife started learning very actively French language, and a language she's still mastering very well today. So I'm not blaming any waste of time or misdirection, but in a sense, you never know until the circumstances decide for you. I had the impression that I would not return to Japan for a certain period of time, that I needed to do my show my strengths and my talent, at the headquarters, the good corporate citizen, try to fulfill every expectation from the organization. And that organization was very dynamic. Roussel was connected to the large German group called Hoechst. I think the name probably disappeared from most people's memories, but back in those days, Hoechst was one of the largest chemical conglomerate. I mean, a name next to Bayer or Ciba-Geigy, back in those days of mega corporation in Europe. Then many of them went through a restructuring, largely focused on accentuating, the key activities, what we used to call the core activities. So back then, the investors had a hard time understanding how you could mix agrochemical with cosmetic and pharmaceutical. They just wanted to have a clear view of how much money is to be made from pharma, how much money is to be made from agro, and so on and so forth. And Hoechst, as a group, literally went through that transformation mostly over the 90s, and with the key episode being the transformation into Aventis, that is to say the merger of the leading Rhône-Poulenc business with Hoechst to create this mega pharmaceutical group back then. Aventis was later on acquired by Sanofi, and now today most of the Aventis legacy, and therefore Roussel legacy, it's still embedded in the Sanofi portfolio.
Okay. So how did you get back to Japan? Like as you mentioned, you had to go back to France for a while, but you wanted to come back here. How did you get back here?
I took a plane.
Thank you. You had a job, presumably. You had a role with Sanofi or
no.
Aventis or.
In fact, at the moment where so I started a little bit working in the post-merger or post-acquisition of Aventis by Sanofi, but I realized that that would take me away from the goal that I had back then of returning to Japan. So we come back almost to your first question, and so I decided to leave the Sanofi group to join Glaxo SmithKline in Japan.
Right. And so what was your role in Glaxo SmithKline when you got over here?
Oh, first of all, it's probably the most amazing 11 years of my life, because I literally experimented everything, legal, of course. Now it was an incredible school of empowerment, and I started in the sales organization at a time where not a single foreigner had ever worked in the top management of the sales division in the newly formed Glaxo SmithKline, because Glaxo SmithKline was also the result of many years of transformation, acquisition, from Glaxo acquiring Wellcome to become Glaxo Wellcome, and then, kind of forced marriage with SmithKline, the two UK champions, to form the Glaxo SmithKline sort of national champion. The same way, a few years later, actually, Sanofi acquiring Aventis was doing that by claiming to create the national champion of the pharmaceutical industry in France, which, of course, it sounds a bit bizarre when you look at the amazingly international dimension of the industry. How would you think of a national champion when you know that the challenges are global? But that will take
that's
us
another
to
podcast.
That's another podcast.
So you were running the sales part.
No, so in the very beginning, if I try to remember each and every steps of this incredible adventure, I started as a deputy sales division manager in charge of the specialty care, and there was this promotion department and some back office function of the sales and so on.
So are you managing Japanese staff by this time?
Yes.
So what was, this podcast is about leadership, right? So What's fascinating is when I get to talk with leaders and they come to Japan and their first experiences and then their subsequent experiences as they move up through the ranks and they get more and more accountability, more and more responsibility. What was your first experiences of leading? What things did you think, wow, this is quite challenging here, or this is a little bit different? What were things that occurred to you?
Probably it may sound weird to you, but I never really asked myself this question because I started working in Japan in the ranks.
Right.
And so, in a way, and as I was trying to describe to you through my early days experience, I started in Japan from the ranks and testing the Japanese style management from, literally reporting to that management.
And what's the Japanese style management that you were discovering there?
Back then, a mix of very autocratic and very, I would say, group-driven. This quasi-impossible equilibrium between trying to reach consensus but forcing the consensus. So we Westerners have a tendency to believe that consensus starts from convincing each and everyone in the room up to the point where finally everyone get the picture and then put their signature at the bottom of the page. I think through these many years of working with Japanese people that I came to discover that there is a part of it. I'm not disputing that. It's a little bit more complicated than that. There is also a strong selling part that should not escape people's attention. And that is the part that I call autocratic. I'm not trying to be negative in that. I mean, I've seen a lot of very strong leaders in my working experience here. But people who were considered fair. Okay, strong but fair. It's a little bit...
if we took it in political science terms, a type of guided democracy, perhaps.
Yes, or back in the late 18th century, what Voltaire used to call the enlightened leadership. Okay, so it's a dictator, but it's a smart one. After all, would it be better if it were to be guided by a stupid democracy? I mean, I don't want to enter in those territories because. For me, there is the question of choice that is pivotal to guarantee the freedom of people. But in terms of achieving the leadership role and responsibility, yes, there was a form of enlightened leadership. Okay?
And was that a model that you adopted for yourself? Because you've come up through the ranks in the company. So when you got to a position of leadership yourself, were you operating off a French model, a Japanese model, a combination model? What was the basis of your leadership?
It's a complicated question because it was always very difficult for me to really ensure that type of leadership belongs to that type of culture.
Right.
I went through many different structures, and not least because of the repeated restructuring that I was mentioning earlier. The Hoechst Group was reinventing itself on a quasi 3-4 year cycle. So when I returned to Japan after my internship, and I finally get recruited by Roussel, joined Roussel in France, thought that I would be in France for a significant period of time. My wife eventually started working in France, so to that point, until the next day when I heard that they need someone to, speaking Japanese to be sent back to Japan because we had a new business there. And I went to Osaka. Okay, spent 4 years.
What years were you in Osaka?
I was during the 92 to 95.
92. We just missed each other. I was in Nagoya from 92 to 96.
Okay, but that's more or less the period I was in Osaka, living in Kobe, and therefore went through this very traumatic experience of the Kobe earthquake. I used to live nearby Sumiyoshi Station, at the one station back from Sannomiya. So
I was living on Rokko.
Okay.
Up on the mountain.
Great, that's the luxury area. I cannot afford that. Okay,
so
no,
Australian government was paying me to be the Consul General. I had the Consul General's residence too. It was fabulous.
But I used to climb the Rokko once in a while because I had many friends in Tokyo say, Philippe, can we come to your place? And then we go to Rokko together, go to the onsen just after the climbing. That was a great period. And living in Kobe was an exquisite experience. I mean, between the sea and the mountain, good climate, and good
very
food.
International.
Very international.
No one takes any notice of you at all.
We were between the Canadian Academy and Rokko Highland had this P&G headquarters, if you remember. No, you're right.
Anyway,
my wife was born in Yokohama, and for her, Kobe was the closest thing she could think of.
I think both there. Yokohama and Kobe opened as ports on the 1st of April, 1868, from memory. I think they both opened on the same day. Different locations, but same day. But anyway, please. Yeah. So we're talking about leadership again. I'm digressing, but let's get back to leadership.
Yes, so the point I'm trying to make here is that when you live in this environment where you certainly have a foreign presence, my boss was French. We had a few international people, German, European at large. I mean, besides Germany, because of the Hoechst German origin, I'm specifically mentioning that. Then when Hoechst joined forces with Dow Chemical for Marion Merel Dow to be part of the Hoechst Marion Roussel, that was probably the last time we saw the name of Roussel somewhere on the board. That was adding a few more Americans. And so when you live with the constant awareness of this multinationality, the very strange impact of it is that you forget about the national specifics. Okay? And of course you have. Either you become extremely aware of it, to the point of obsession, like, oh, we have so many French in the room, or oh, today is a German meeting, or you become completely agnostic to it because who cares? You know, you create an organization. Exactly, you create an organization upon and above the whole things of. That doesn't mean that you neglect culture. It means that you look at the cultural aspect of management from a very, very different angle. And so I was part of it at different level of responsibility, and certainly not, the top management level back in those days. But I was clearly exposed and part of those conversations. And for me, the real, let's say, cross-cultural leadership experience is when I was promoted to lead the Taiwan organization. Okay. Because that was really like plunging me into a completely unknown environment. With lots of challenge. I mean, the Hoechst Pharma was not a company, so I had to create a company from scratch with Hoechst Marion Roussel. Then, recreate an organization with, its own administration, culture, organization, and so on. And then came the Aventis merger on top of that, and we have to bring up the Ron Poulenc people into this adventure. And so I did a lot of experience building into creating organization. My love for creating organization probably came from that period. But that was for me, taking me away from Japan, taking me away from sort of personal connection to the local cultural fabric and stuff. Here I was clearly plunged into a place I've never been before, very international, though most of my colleagues speak, better English than myself, and a very decisive moment, because if you remember back in the late 90s, that was the opening of Taiwan to democracy. Right. Actually, that was the first time an opposition party obtained majority at the parliament. And later on, actually, the president of Taiwan came from the DPP, from the Democratic Party. Yeah, the recurrent nemesis of the KMT, the Kuomintang Party, which was the, let's say, Chinese legacy representative party back then. And so here I am in a country, very dynamic, that literally moved from agricultural baseline sort of survival economy to making plastics for the rest of the world, and then moving into the semiconductor, to the point that today everyone is telling you that if you touch Taiwan, literally you break down the entire IT infrastructure of the world. So, that's also...
Like 80% of the most advanced chips are being produced
exactly.
by one company in Taiwan, right?
More than half of the motherboards of your laptops are made there, okay? And you had this absolutely amazing but very undercover company called Taiwan Semiconductor Corporation, which is an amazing company, tentacular but very silent. You don't see TSMC, names everywhere. Everyone in the industry know about them, but their quest for excellence, their permanent pursuit of the most performant chip, the most performant equipment, cost-effective, and so on. One day people will write a book about TSMC, because it's something, it's even beyond whatever Jack Welch GE has achieved in the meantime.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. Interesting.
Yeah.
So let's move forward to your first major leadership role in Japan. What period was that, and what were you doing?
So to a certain degree, that was when I returned to work for Glaxo SmithKline in Japan. So the role that I briefly described to you, this deputy director of the sales division, with some segment of that division reporting directly to me. And again, in a scissor position between a global corporation culture, the Glaxo SmithKline group, a group that was still under construction, so to speak. I mean, the merger took place from the early 2000s, but it took a little bit longer in Japan. So you could see a lot of Glaxo people trying to mix up with the SmithKline people. So you had almost on the forehead of the people around you, where they come from and which group they belong to, and probably silently, I realized that much later, but not at the point when I joined the company. There was also an appetite for bringing new people in that had no G or no S on the forehead, and that could really jump into, remolding to the new culture. It's always... Probably it would be different today, and we may discuss of that later, but I'm talking of a period where life employment was still a dominant trait of the labor market in Japan. I'm talking of very strong affinity of each and every employee to their organization. So unlike the Western world, where mergers and acquisition was just like, mixing people, recreating, with probably doing more but costing less, this famous synergy, focus, and so on. That kind of message was extremely difficult for the global corporation to pass in Japan, because, even for cross-Japanese merger. I remember, the Daiichi and Sankyo coming together. That was like, wow, people were just looking at it like an exception. Of course, in the meantime, you had more. And I remember that was the days where you had probably like 300 wholesalers in Japan. Okay, now through consolidation, absorption, and restructuring, you probably come up to maybe, between 40 and 50. I may forget someone, so I'm cautious about the numbers. But and you have the big four. Okay, so this. What I'm saying now is like reflecting on Japan 2021 and soon moving to 2022, and trying to see how to read those events that I witnessed back in 2005. I tend to see that a lot of water passed under the bridge. That's for sure, and that means also the connection of employee to their company, the sense of corporate legacy, the sense of belonging to an organization beyond yourself, beyond your own individuality, which was something I found striking when I was working in Osaka, because Osaka was also a joint venture. Actually, it was a shareholders collaboration between Ajinomoto and Roussel, and that was Morishita Roussel, headquartered in Osaka. And so we had the Morishita people, we had the Roussel people, and we had the Ajinomoto people. And I realized over the many years that I've always been living in an environment where people were bringing with them their legacy. But I think that is something quite common in the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in terms of your what was your first major leadership role where you're in charge, you're the boss?
Essentially, so that started with this deputy director of the sales division. Then I was, asked to look after the launch of, back then, the mega product of Glaxo SmithKline for asthma and COPD, called Adoe, an inhaler, twice a day for the treatment of asthma, including pediatric asthma and COPD. That was a major, achievement for me, because I was in charge of a project I could immediately measure if I, mess up or if I did something that changed the company. So this immediate response to how well you do, which is always something very difficult in leadership. Did I screw up? Very few CEO can tell you for sure today if they screwed up or not. When Larry made an announcement that he's splitting GE into 3 companies, that will be probably happening between GE Healthcare in 22, GE Energy in 23, and the other part in 24. How can he be sure that he's not screwing up something? That part of, taking decision today that may have everlasting consequences on the way people look at you and the way your organization is performing. It's something that I've never really graduated up to that point. So my role of a leader is very field leader. I never worked in the état major of. But from that field experience, working with people of different cultural background and trying to achieve a goal that you immediately measure the impact of, that was an incredible experience, yes. And then I did some... So after this Adoe successful launch, the group reorganized itself in business unit, as it was very common back in those days. But we saw the need for creating a sort of backbone organization that will support the core function, the common function across the different BU. It's not because one group is selling an antidepressant and the other one is selling an anti-asthma product that they don't need commercial data, they need market research, they need call center, they need all those fundamentals that you could easily share between them. So I took care of this shared service structure for the commercial operations, And then after the Tohoku, and that was inclusive actually of supply chain. So because since you do the forecast, you pass the forecast to the manufacturing organization. So that was an amazing period because I was in contact with every single part of the organization, be it manufacturing with supply chain, R&D with portfolio strategy, innovation with digital technology, and so on and so forth. So, and I took a little bit of this innovation baggage with me, and in 2012, I was asked to create from scratch. That was back then still unheard of in the pharma industry. Create a business innovation group. So I had digital, portfolio, and business development into it, and clearly the sky was the limit.
And so after that, what happened after that?
Alors, it's after that, GSK, like many other groups, take. First of all, if we have time to get into the detail, part of my business development responsibility put me in contact with the leading pharmaceutical company in Africa called Aspen Pharmacare, headquartered in South Africa. And Aspen and GSK had a very long-term relationship. And in the course of the 2000s, actually GSK had sold some of the, all product of the portfolio, as Aspen was showing a strong eagerness to create a portfolio from the product that were perceived as non-priority by the large corporation. That was one of the, very successful and attention-driven business model back in those days. I think it's a little bit changing right now, but that was the case. And so they had actually acquired product of GSK, but in Japan, nobody of Aspen Japan could look after them because Aspen Japan did not exist until the day where Aspen came to Japan and say, well, we would like to create something to look after the product that you sold to us. I say, yes, that's perfectly legitimate. You should do that. And in fact, in the course of preparing that transition, they asked me if, as a détaché from GSK, I could be helping them put that organization in place. And that was one of my. I had only a few dreams. I'm not a dreamer by nature, but one of my dreams is, you may call me stupid, I understand that, was to create a pharma company in Japan. Don't tell me where does that come from, but when you work in pharma, when you work in Japan, and then when you out of the blue and without drinking too much, you ask yourself, okay, what I really want to do in this company? That would be great if I create a company from scratch. And here I have, this delegation from, actually that was the Aspen team from Australia that was trying to spread across Asia Pacific. And I say, Philippe, could you please help us, create Aspen Japan? I say, yeah, where do we sign?
So you got like a secondment from GSK?
I got a secondment from GSK to work with the Aspen team, a very agile team. I mean, the people there, they were amazing, which also, exposed me to different way of doing business, a little bit one step back from the large corporation, but also see the limitation of having this ultra agile organization working with a very, let's say, substantial, mature, let's take every step very carefully kind of large corporation. And when you're in the middle of the two, you feel like, life is complicated. But that was an amazing, very few hours of sleep, but very intensive experience.
How big did Aspen get? How big did you make it?
Well, it's not really to make it big or not, because to be totally honest with you, Aspen was taking business that they had already acquired.
Right.
Okay.
I'm thinking about staff.
But at the start, actually, from day one, we were sitting like on top of maybe, out of memory, because it's some time ago already, something like 5 billion yen turnover. And then actually the people who came after me jumped literally to a different stage right after.
So are you getting staff from GSK as well? Or
Very few.
Outside,
it happened. I mean, we created that channel for people who volunteer to join that, not on a secondment, but a career change, a real cross the Rubicon sort of scenario,
right, yeah.
And I recruited mostly from outside.
Outside, okay.
But
so
there
how
were
many
a
people
few.
did it grow to while you were there?
Oh, very rapidly we exceeded. I mean, with the sales force included, we were probably, when I left, I was the number 4 employee after recruiting the cornerstone triumvirate, the responsible pharmacist, QA officer, and safety officer. That is the backbone of every licensed pharmaceutical industry. I was the number 4 employee. The number 5 employee was the HR person. So we started at 5, almost the same day. And when I left, we were probably in the region of 70%.
So very quick
Yeah,
expansion.
but again, in fairness, unlike many startup that I see, establishing their KK today in Japan, we didn't start from a single product with the first patient treated. We had the portfolio.
You just needed to bring the people.
Exactly. And actually, the race was to create the organization in time to take over a business that was up and running. The next morning, say, Mr.
That's
Auvaro,
an unusual challenge, isn't it, to catch up the organization to the existing business?
Yeah, I don't recommend that for weak heart people.
Okay.
But
so what things did you find from a leadership point of view helped you to make that a success? How did you get people engaged? How did you get creativity? How did you build trust, or sort of core necessities of leadership? What did you find that worked for you?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure I'm very good at that. My philosophy of leadership is to show by doing.
Okay.
Okay. So probably, I don't know, you may blame my French education or some cultural bias that I have, but French love theory. But when it comes to the motivation, the empathy, and so on, then theory tend to come lower in the priority rank. Okay, and I'm a little bit like that. And sometimes when I look at some American fellows or even Japanese fellows, to be frank, I wish I could be a little bit more like them. Pay attention to that, to the software. My leadership vision, if I continue on that allegory, is probably more hardware driven than software driven.
Right.
And I think that today, probably a successful leader need to be well balanced between this hardware software stuff.
So when you say hardware software, you're talking about more directive leadership, pushing for the results as hardware, is what you're talking about? Software being more the empathy, communication skills, people skills. Is that the differential?
Yes, you may. I will perfectly accept that simplification because that's probably the easiest way to understand what I'm trying to mean. That's perfectly correct. I mean, if I would say that bluntly, I say, what's the point of being philosophical in business if we don't have product to sell?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So let's focus on the product.
Pragmatic.
So the pragmatic side of it. But in fairness, I'm not sure that this is always a condition of success. I tend to be, probably because I'm getting older, I tend to be more mitigated. There is a moment where you need to put that empathy phase into your discussion. And I'm not antipathic by any means. The point is for me, get the priority right, but again, for me, it's also internally, it's a matter of debate with myself. When is this software part or the skill part, probably, but also the paying attention to the people character, their own expectation, their own vision, the talking and listening balance, for example. When I was young, I had a reputation of, and some people among my friends, or maybe less my friends, will say I continue to be talking too much. Listen
I guess
more.
that's, often we see the differential between so-called hard skills around technical capability, and then you have the soft skills, which are not related to that, which is communication, empathy, getting motivation.
Yes.
They're quite different. And the challenge is, how do you have a good grasp of both? Because you've got to have technical skills in some aspects, but as you get up the leadership, they become less important because other people are doing that. You're now leading people. So did you feel that at some point you transitioned, that you sort of thought, well, actually, others are doing more of the technical things that I used to do. My role is now a bit different.
Yeah.
Or did you keep going with the sort of, you like the technical side?
Well, the short answer to your question is I love the technical side of it. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine that I would be working, say, for example, let's take something concrete like a car, and not having, my hands in the engine at some point. I do not pretend to be as skillful as the real engineer who is going to look after what's going wrong in your engine, but I need to get a sense of where the problem comes from and how we're going to do that and what's the implication and so on and so forth. I never really had a headquarter exposure.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
right.
So I'm a field person.
Right.
And on top of that, I got that field experience very far from home, so very far from the natural codification of my, let's say, quote, cultural background. Okay? To the point where I decided to set the culture aside and, just have to do what you have to do with the people around you. They are human beings after all.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Then, of course, sometimes, you find things very... And I think this is particularly true in Japan, because you always have this show of paying attention to the others, almost to the point of being counterproductive. Like, I love that story. It's a true story. So when I arrived in Roussel Morishita in Osaka, people were, they were used to see a foreigner in the top of the building office where the chateau is and so on, and they never expected the young French guy being in the middle of the controlling department in the planning division, and they were just like, can he eat like us? Can you use the chopsticks, etc. But the funny part was, one day, say, Mr. Auvaro, we need to do your name card because for your internal function, controlling finance, but you may have to visit banks and stuff like that. So I say, yes, sure, no problem. So tell me what's the template, where do you put the first name, where do you put the family name, and so on. And so I gave my name, Philippe Auvaro, and the address in Doshomachi, at the center of the pharma industry there, very traditional. And that was very funny because after I gave my name card, people start calling me Philippe-san. I say, oh, that's very strange because, the guy next door was Yamada-san. He was called Yamada-san, and Takashi-san was called Takashi-san, and me, I was Philippe-san. I say, it's very, I don't mean any bad, but actually I feel very, I love this casual relationship, but my family name is Auvaro, and the guy really, I knew that. I was just like, maybe I should not say that, but it's you call Yamada and then Philippe-san. I said, no, my name is not Philippe. My name is Auvaro. I'm so sorry, Auvaro-san. Yeah, well, no, and don't be sorry. I mean, I'm perfectly fine being called Philippe-san, but just for you to know, you don't get confused. And then he was looking at my name, guy. I said, it's very strange. I said, what is strange? But because your card say Auvaro Philippe. I say, yeah, because my colleague, show me your card. Yamada Taro. So Auvaro Philippe, Yamada Taro. And I can say, okay. So you didn't switch. And actually,
they're expecting you to have a Western order.
It means that, they project one step ahead, and they are almost surprised that you wanted to avoid that thinking one step ahead and try to do as much as you do like the Roman.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of misunderstanding between Westerners and Japanese is coming from that. After many years of living here, this anticipation, like, many times I'm driving bicycle in Tokyo. And okay, we drive car on the left side. So if we are on the sidewalk and I see a bicycle coming from the other side, I put myself on the left side because we are in Japan and it's a left side country. The other person look at a foreigner and say, he might be it's an American, he might be driving the right side, and then they go on the left side.
That's funny.
And so really it's amazing French will never do that intellectual effort.
Right.
But Japanese do that effort of thinking, and that is for me the true definition of empathy. Yeah.
Sensitivity.
To project, he might be that. So he might be thinking like this, so I should react accordingly.
Like
Wow.
And that's a good point, because we don't tend to do that. We don't anticipate. No. We don't even imagine that we could anticipate what they're thinking to then take actions accordingly. We tend to see what we see and we react to that. So after Aspen, what was the next job for you?
So at the end of Aspen, there were many transformations in GSK, and we decided to separate from each other. And it's not the bucket list, but after fulfilling my dream of creating a pharma company, say maybe it's time to test you working for a Japanese organization. But being part of. I knew the founder and CEO of CMIC for many years because our kids, our two families have boys exactly of the same age. And we went through all the PTA activities together. And, when a pharma dad meet another pharma dad, they do the pharma dad connection. So we had all this, while I was in GSK, all these PT activities. I was making the acquaintance of the Nakamura family. And when he heard that I was graduating from GSK, he said, could you please come over? Because I had this OrphanPacific company. I really want to have a pharmaceutical entity inside CMIC Group, but it's not doing right. I mean, can you come over and see, how you can turn that around? And I say, rare disease. I mean, that had a very strong appeal on me because back in the GSK days, I was fortunate to work with Marc Dunoyer, who is one of the first person who opened my mind to the rare disease concept.
To the what concept?
Rare disease.
Oh, rare disease. Okay.
The disease where you have maybe sometimes not even 10 patients in Japan.
Wow. Okay.
And that was so counterintuitive to me. I said, but Mark, why would we spend time, trying to cure those 10 people? We're never going to make money with that.
Yeah.
And how wrong can you be? But I mean, this was genius. It's pure genius. When you look at the world today, the world of pharma today is rare disease, 200%. So I was lucky. I was working with the smart guy who opened my eyes to something that was to become a reality 15 years later. So I will never repay that tribute back, but I need to give back to Kaiser what belongs to him. And since then, I developed a very strong interest in this orphan drug industry. and rare disease challenge, because some diseases you never heard their name before, but they are devastating.
So the Nakamoto family have placed you in charge of that business. You're running it, right?
Exactly.
So, this is again another level of leadership experience for you. What were some of the lessons you got from being in that position? The founders are not shareholders; they're owners, I guess. Is it a public company?
CMIC is a listed company.
Listed company, okay.
Okay, so in all fairness, CMIC doesn't show the threat of a family business the way you may interpret it.
Right.
Strong governance, obligation of publication to the investors, obligation of publication to the shareholders. So clearly, crossing the T's and pointing the I's of everything that belongs to the rules of governance in Japan. And I know that the rules of corporate governance in Japan is a hot topic for many years in this country.
That's another podcast.
That's another podcast. And of course, people are, have their mind open. They read the Nikkei that I do, and they know the Olympus problem. They know the Konica Minolta problem. They know we were in the building of Toshiba. So I can tell you, and we had the TV crew at the entrance more than often. So we know the part of the world we are living in, and for me that was a first-hand exposure to corporate Japan. So the main learning experience, beside the topic of leadership, which I will touch briefly on later, but the real experience, the real gain of I've never been here before, was the corporate life. And I realized also that was the first time I worked in a headquarters. I never been in a headquarters before.
Yeah, that's interesting. So what were the leadership lessons you took away from that experience?
Probably partly the things that we briefly touched upon earlier.
Soft skills.
The soft and the hard balance. A turnaround is a difficult experience because you cannot really blame the people who were there for how bad the things went. But you need to create what the people at GSK used to call the fire under the seat. Okay? Frankly speaking, maybe I don't have the skill set for that, but I don't know how to set the fire under the seat of someone without showing a little bit of hardship to that person. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
You say, how can I be soft to someone sitting right on top of the fire that I just set? It doesn't look very... So we had to do that properly because I'm still driven very heavily by the notion of respect. So my point is not to scold people or throw a Hoechst at their face or stuff like that. I know some companies where that happens, so I'm quoting that example on purpose.
Yeah, and I've heard that too. And I talk to, in our classes, we talk about leadership. Sometimes the Japanese are relating that, about mistakes, that when I was younger I made a mistake. My boss threw in the days when there were ashtrays, he threw an ashtray at my head, and yelling at me. I mean, this is, Japan goes back a way. It was a little bit different to what it is today. But thinking about that, you've got this tension between how to direct people and how to motivate people. It's always a very tricky tension. But thinking about in total, if you were going to give some advice to an executive being sent to Japan, they've been in headquarters, okay, you go run our Japan operation, they've got some things they've got to achieve. What would be some advice you give someone coming here? They don't know Japan, they don't know the culture. What should they be careful about?
That's a very tough question. Because I've seen everything and the opposite. And but in a sense, if it was to dry down to, like a couple of bullet points.
Yeah.
The first one is really be yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, behave according to what you believe is right, because you will never be too far from the truth by doing that. And based on that name card story or bicycle story that I shared with you, don't volunteer for the empathy, because the guy in front of you is coming with twice the same luggage to you. So I tend to believe it's probably better to let it come than to try to go.
Right.
Okay. I also see, over the many years of working here, and not exclusively in the field of pharma, but inclusive of the field of pharma, a strong. Some people may challenge me on that. Okay, that may be superficial, but I regret. But today, Chugai and Roche, it's the two sides of the same coin. Christophe Weber is the CEO of Takeda Pharmaceutical, the most emblematic pharmaceutical group in Japan, and so on and so forth. Of course, you can, throw me back the Carlos Ghosn episode, the Olympus governance episode, and so on. I'm not saying the sky is, except today, I will be, I will be wrong, but I'm not saying the sky is all blue. I'm just saying there is an appetence for, accepting the gaiatsu, the foreign challenge, the foreign pressure. It's not pure curiosity. So yes, when you land in the job of CEO, all of a sudden, you know that you're going to put your feet in shoes that are either too small or too hard, or not exactly to the size of it. And but that's your feet. You're not going to change them. And that's the shoes. They will probably, from experience, there is a larger probability that the shoes get to the feet rather than the feet to the shoes. But, okay. Of course, the experience might be painful from time to time. Your big toes might suffer more than you wish for, but is the shoe and the foot at the end of the day. Okay, and I think that I see a greater psychological flexibility, especially in the 30s, 40s generation now in Japan, than I've seen before.
Right.
Okay, they don't want you to change. I even get people who scolded me because I was speaking Japanese. I say, "But Mr. Auvaro, we want to learn English." Okay, that's. But I'm French, so maybe my English accent will be, maybe it's not a good school for you. I say, no, actually it's easier for us to understand that, I say, okay, perfect. Then it's easier to understand that some, American accent, like the Texan accent, or if it's British Oxford, we are okay. But French accent, very good. Keep it.
Keep it going.
Okay, very good. But so that's the kind of feedback you had today.
Change.
And so clearly, the hard to adapt. Yes, I'm sure that you have lots of people who will come to you with traumatic experience of complete flop, but what is the share of the business condition in that? And again, when I say that, I might be also influenced by my, fact-driven leadership style. They say, okay, did you think that the atmosphere in the company was a mess because you didn't sell well? What is the cause? What is the effect? Are you sure that you're not selling well was partly linked to the fact that the atmosphere was not good, that they were, that the king was naked but nobody dare saying? And so, I'm not always convinced that there is an immediate, causality relationship between the two. But over the years, I realized that being more balanced in the soft and hard is something that I probably missed here and there in my career. Yes.
Should they learn Japanese?
But to enjoy life a little bit, yes. But again, recently, I mean, it all depends. But if you're a CEO of a group that want to expand from Japan to the rest of the world, no. You need the rest of the organization to start learning English, and very fast. Okay? So it all depends on so many different circumstances. You're being parachuted as a CEO of an American affiliate in Tokyo. No, because I imagine part of your job is to promote and steer up the next generation leaders in your organization. Around me, I see a lot of people telling me, Philippe, it's a nightmare. Everyone is coming with next generation leaders at the global leader forum of their, the big headquarters. You have less of that with COVID, but things are going to come back to normal. And say, and so we got, Australian, we got, Chinese educated at Harvard, we got Indians with PhD at Yale, and we in Japan, we are nowhere on the map. So I'm quite sure that a lot of people receive the signal, how am I going to be as a CEO in let's say, foreign organization operating here, being the agent of change, bringing the next big talent in Japan. Okay, and you have talents, a Todai graduate in biochemistry, I can tell you, he knows the turf. He or she, by the way, I'm not exclusive in the gender here, but and I think also there is a strong interest by many Japanese, at least the one that I see around me, about some cultural change that we witness in our Western societies. I was just talking about the gender equality. Unfortunately, you and I, we know that on the gender equality agenda, Japan is not performing very well. But there is, even inside the government, people telling you, that has lasted too long. We need to do something about it. The diversity agenda is strong. The sustainability agenda is strong. So Japan is not a pre-Meiji Tokugawa period Japan anymore. Huh? No, and even more so in the corporate world than in the society. So no, I think it's quite an extraordinary experience to become a parachuted CEO of a foreign affiliate in Japan nowadays, because back in the 80s, 90s, when you were looked at like alien, that was what was written on your card, alien card. Yeah. Okay.
Alien registration card.
Yeah.
Welcome to Japan. So what's your definition of leadership?
Well, it's too much the expectation of the people who work with you. It's a transaction. There is a fair amount of trust and almost a delegation that people put in you. So you need to measure that scope and accept it or not, or redefining the scope of it. So this transactional part for me is very important. As I said many times during this interview, I'm very fact-driven. So, we have to do something, and that level of responsibility even more so come from, selling pharmaceutical products. So you don't really, jungle with that. You get people like dying in the hospital if you don't do the right job at the right speed. Okay, so
it's very severe.
Yeah, it's tight. You're handling people's health, so people are very harsh on you. They will triple check everything you do. They will be on your back if you miss one day of deadline, and so on and so forth. And I'm not asking for complacency. That's the world pharma is living in, Nobody, people say, oh, what a great performance, but nobody really realized that developing the COVID vaccine the way it has been developed is unheard of.
Yeah.
unheard of. And that speed, Greg, is not coming from, a fact of God or a providential hand, coming upon us and saying, this is how we are going to do. It's an amazing acceleration. It's a quantum leap of everything that we used to know, and then we put them just in place at the right time. The warp operation in, where you put the military, this guy know nothing about the medicine, but they say, what we know is that we have something here, and we need to bring it there in a certain period of time that we should not exceed. And that fact-driven leadership for me means a lot, and it comes again from the expectation that people have on you. You cannot be a leader if people don't have the expectation of you as a leader. Okay, so a leader defines himself or herself a lot by how much projection the people working around have on them. And people working around doesn't mean essentially the direct report or people of the same, could be the society. Okay? How much leadership has the pharmaceutical industry demonstrated in the COVID-19 crisis? Okay? That's also a proof of leadership. Pfizer, BioNTech, or Moderna, taking the helm of this race for, new mode of action vaccination, getting registered in less than a year, pushing all the cursors, challenging all the rules. You got this emergency drug use approval. The regulation was decided on the corner of a table at the FDA the week after the people were already stamping the documents okay, approved, but on emergency use only. And people forget, but BioNTech got formally approved only a couple of months ago.
Yeah, no, it's been astounding.
So the agency was extremely agile. They understood exactly, the level of stress created by the crisis. The industry was extremely agile. Where do you draw the line of leadership then? Leadership at FDA, leadership in the pharma industry, leadership in many aspects. But that leadership came from external causes and large expectation by the society, by the community, about making things happen, and if possible, as soon as they can.
Well, fascinating discussion today, and this should be a 10-hour podcast, because I know
we won't have time, Greg.
We could keep going, but thank you for joining me today.
No, thanks for your invitation. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And please join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.